Hey, my name is Marcus. I'm 32 years old, and I run a one-bay auto shop on the edge of a town called Sedalia, Missouri, in the low brick building out past the grain elevator where the highway thins back down to a two-lane and the radio starts to crackle. I fix cars. That's the whole of what I do and most of what I am. I open at 7. I've usually got somebody's truck up on the lift before the coffee's done, and I work through whatever rolls in until the light goes flat and orange over the fields out back. I do honest work and I don't gouge anybody, which my old mechanic Earl tells me about once a week is why I'll die poor. And he's probably right. After close, I sweep the bay. I cash out the till. I lock the chain across the lot. And I go home to a rented house with a couch, a television I don't turn on much, and a refrigerator that mostly holds what I bring back from the gas station. I'm not going to dress that up either. The shop's never quiet. The house is. I'd gotten used to that the way you get used to a knock in an engine you've decided not to fix. You stop hearing it most days until something makes you hear it again. I'll tell you the one thing that explains the rest, and I'll tell it plain. I came up without much family. My mother passed when I was 19, and my father had already been gone in every way that counts long before that. And I joined the Army at 20, mostly because it was a place that would feed me and tell me where to stand. That's where I met Danny, Daniel Pruitt. We deployed together, came home in one piece together, and ended up back in the same part of Missouri where his people were from. And that's how I came to know the Pruitt house out on County Road E. Because Danny had somewhere to come home to, and I didn't. And the first Thanksgiving we were back stateside, he just said, "You're coming to my folks, that's not a question." And I went, and I never really stopped going. His dad was Ray. Big, easy man, hands like a catcher's mitt, ran a body shop in town for 30 years and could talk about a carburetor until your ears fell off, which suited me fine because I could listen to it that long. His mom was Maggie. And in that house, for the first time in my grown life, there was a table that was always full, and nobody once asked what I was good for before they set a place for me. I'd sit at the Pruitt Sunday table with Danny and Ray and Maggie and whatever neighbors had drifted in, and I'd think, this is the thing other people have. This is what it is. Ray died 3 years ago this past March. Cancer, the slow kind, the kind that takes a man room by room over 2 years while everybody pretends it's a fair fight. Maggie nursed him the whole way, by herself mostly, because Danny had moved up to Kansas City by then with his wife Becca and their 2 little ones. And there's only so many times a man with a job and babies can make the drive. I came when I could. I sat with Ray near the end, and he held my wrist with that big hand gone thin as kindling, and told me to keep an eye on his girls, meaning Maggie and the granddaughters. And I said I would, and I meant it the way you mean a thing at a deathbed, which is completely and without any idea what you've just agreed to. That was my life and the shape it was in. I expected it to stay that way. Then it was the Sunday after the funeral, and I went out to the house on County Road E to drop off the casserole dish my landlady had sent food in. And I found Maggie at the kitchen sink, and after that, nothing was ever quite the same. She was still in the dress. The funeral had been on Friday, and it was Sunday evening, and she was standing at the sink in the black dress she'd worn to bury her husband, washing the casserole dishes that the whole county had brought over, because that's what there was to do with her hands. The water had gone cold, and she was washing dishes in it anyway. Her hands were pruned up from being in it too long. Her reading glasses were shoved up into hair that had gone mostly gray in the 2 years she'd spent nursing Ray. She'd stopped coloring it somewhere in there, and nobody had noticed, least of all her. And there was a piece of it stuck to her cheek where she'd been crying without making any sound. And she didn't move it, because moving it would have meant admitting it was there. She heard me at the screen door, and she put her face away fast, the way you'd set down a cup before company sees it's empty. And she said, "Marcus, you didn't have to drive all the way out." In a voice that was steady and bright, and the loneliest thing I have ever heard come out of a person. Here's the part I'm not proud of. I had a coat on, and my truck was running, and I had the dish in my hands and a hollow sentence ready. "I just wanted to return this. You let me know if you need anything." The exact same nothing sentence the whole county had been saying to her for 3 days. The sentence that means, "I am sorry and I am leaving, and please don't actually need anything." I almost said it. I was tired, and the grief was sitting on me too. And a man tells himself, "That's the son's job. That's not your place. You've done the decent thing. Now go home." I had one foot already turned toward the truck. And then I looked at the cold gray dishwater and her pruned-up hands still going in it, washing a dish that was already clean. And I understood she wasn't washing dishes. She was just doing the one thing that kept her standing up. So I set the casserole dish down on the counter, and I took off my coat, and I picked up the dish towel off the oven handle, and I said, "I'll dry." And she looked at me for a second like she might come apart. And then she didn't. And we did the dishes, the two of us, in cold water, not talking. Until they were all done and the kitchen was quiet, and Ray was still gone. But the sink was empty. And that was something. That was the only thing I had to give her, and I gave it. That became the shape of the next year, though neither of us would have called it anything. It started with the car. Ray had always kept Maggie's old Buick running, and now Ray was gone, and that car was 18 years old, and it knew it. So when it started bucking at the stop signs, she called me instead of Danny, because Danny was 3 hours away, and I was 11 minutes. And I came out and pulled the plugs and found them fouled to nothing, and I fixed it in her driveway while she brought me iced tea and stood in the garage door talking. And then it was the garbage disposal. And then it was a porch light. And then it was just Sunday. Because somewhere in there it stopped being about the car. I'd come out on a Sunday because the shops closed Sundays, and a man's got to be somewhere. And she'd have started something on the stove because a woman who's cooked Sunday dinner for 30 years doesn't know how to stop just because the table got empty and we'd eat. Just the two of us at a table built for 8. The first few times she set the places, I watched her catch herself reaching for the 3rd and 4th plates out of 30 years of habit and put them back. And I pretended not to see. Because some things a person needs you not to see. I learned that Maggie Pruitt was not the soft, fading widow the casserole brigade had decided she was. The first time I really understood it, I'd been complaining about my shop books. I'm a fair hand with an engine and a disaster with paper. And I was drowning in invoices that didn't add up. And she said, "Mild as anything, bring them out here." And she sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours with my shoebox of receipts and a pencil and reading glasses down on her nose. And she didn't just sort it out. She looked up at me over the glasses and said, "Marcus, you're charging Bill Hennessy $19 to do a job that costs you $40. And you're doing it for half the men in this county. You're not running a shop, honey. You're running a charity with a lift in it." Ray was the same. It's a sweet way to go broke. She'd kept the books for Ray's body shop for 30 years. She knew margins I'd never thought about. And after that, I'd bring the shoebox on Sundays. And she'd straighten me out. And I started, for the first time in years, not bouncing checks. And not one man in the county got charged a dime more. Because I couldn't make myself do it, even when she was right. And I knew she was right. She called that the most stubborn kind of generous there is, which from Maggie was not entirely a compliment. One Sunday, and I think this is the one that did it, though I didn't know it then, She asked me straight out, drying a pan, why I kept driving out every week. Danny was gone. Ray was gone. The granddaughters she'd promised to watch over, I barely knew. "You don't owe me Sundays, Marcus," she said. "You did the decent thing a long time ago. You're allowed to go live your life." I could have said something kind. I had a couple ready. But I told her the true thing, because I'd learned by then she'd been handed enough kind nothings to last her. "Because this is the only table I ever had a chair at," I said. "I sat here for 8 years thinking it belonged to other people, and they were letting me borrow it. And then it about disappeared, and I found out I'd rather drive 11 minutes for a borrowed chair than sit home in a house full of my own." She didn't say anything to that for a while. Then she said, not looking at me, "It was never borrowed. Ray told me the second Thanksgiving you came. That boy thinks he's a guest. He used to set your place first on purpose, so you'd see it was waiting." And I had to go out to the truck for a minute and pretend I'd left something in it. There was a Saturday that spring she finally decided to clear out Ray's garage, and she asked me to help. And I understood it was a bigger thing than it sounded, because that garage was Ray. 3 years it had sat exactly as he'd left it. His coffee cup still on the bench with a ring dried in the bottom, his coveralls on the nail, something he'd been chasing still up on blocks under a tarp. We worked all day, the two of us, in that close, dusty space, her handing boxes down off the high shelves and me carrying the heavy things out to the truck, neither of us talking much. The way you don't when the work is the conversation. She'd hold up a thing, a bent license plate, a coffee can full of mismatched bolts, a birthday card from 1994, and decide its whole fate in a second, keep or go. And mostly she kept moving and didn't let herself stop. Because if she stopped, she'd have had to feel all of it at once. When we pulled the tarp off the thing on blocks, it was a 71 Chevelle, Ray's, rough as a cob, the paint gone to primer and rust. She looked at it a long time and laid a hand on the cold fender. Everybody told him to scrap it. For 10 years, said it was junk. And I said, careful, because a man learns to be careful around the things the dead leave running. A battery doesn't die from being used, Maggie. It dies from sitting. That's about all that's wrong with most things people give up on. They got left parked too long, is all. She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't scrap the Chevelle either. It's in my shop now, and I'm bringing it back the slow way, and some Sundays, she comes and sits on a stool and watches and tells me I'm doing the rear end wrong. And she's usually right. The town noticed before either of us would have called it anything. That's a town for you. I was up under a car at the shop one afternoon that summer when I heard a customer in the waiting area, Lloyd Pickett, a man who's never been wrong about anything in his own estimation, saying to Earl, loud enough to carry, that it was a shame about Marcus and the Pruitt widow, a man his age sniffing around a woman past 50, must be after Ray's house and the body shop money. I came out from under that car with my ears hot, and Maggie was standing at the counter. She'd come by to drop off my straightened-out books, and she'd heard every word. And before I could say anything, she set the folder down, calm as Sunday, and said, "Lloyd, Ray fixed your transmission twice and never charged you for the second time because he knew your wife had just got sick. I sat at your kitchen table and brought you a ham the week of her funeral. So you can sit in this man's shop and say, I'm a foolish old woman, if it makes you feel young. But you'll do it after you apologize to him, because he's the only mechanic in 40 miles who'd still touch your sorry truck after what you just said. And you know it." Lloyd's mouth worked, and nothing came out. And he apologized, to the floor mostly, and he still brings his truck in. And Earl tells that story to this day. That was the afternoon I understood I wasn't keeping anybody afloat. The woman everybody had decided was fading had more steel in her than the whole waiting room put together. I just had to be the last one in town to figure it out. The quiet thing came in the fall, on a Sunday after dark. We were on the back porch. It had turned cool and she had a cardigan on, and there was a tissue balled up in the sleeve of it, the way there always was. And we were just sitting, the good kind of sitting. And she told me about the 2 years with Ray, not the medical part. The other part. She told me how somewhere in those 2 years of bathing a grown man and crushing his pills and learning the parking lot at the cancer center by heart, she had stopped existing. I'd be in a room full of people who loved Ray, she said. And they'd ask me how he was doing and how Danny was holding up and how they could help with Ray, and not one of them, not in 2 years, ever once asked how I was. And the worst part is, I didn't notice for the longest time. Because I'd stopped asking myself too. I went somewhere. I put myself somewhere, and I forgot where. She turned her teacup around in her hands. And then he died. And everybody went home, and the casseroles ran out. And I came back to where I'd put myself, and there was nobody there, including me. I'm 53 years old, Marcus, and I look in the mirror, and I can't always find the woman who used to be in it. That sounds dramatic. I don't mean it dramatic. I mean it plain. I think I disappeared, and I think it happened so slow and so quiet that I'm the only one who'll ever even know I'm gone. I don't fix things I can't take apart. You can't take that apart. So I didn't tell her she hadn't disappeared, and I didn't tell her time heals, which is what the people who've never disappeared like to say. I told her the only true thing I had, and it came out of my trade because most of what's true in me comes out that way. You can hear a problem before you can see it, if you've done this long enough, I said. An engine will tell you it's failing weeks before it quits. Makes a little sound. And everybody drives right past the sound because the car still runs, so they figure it's fine. I looked at her. You've been making the sound for 3 years, and the whole county drove right past it. I didn't. I heard you that first Sunday at the sink. You didn't disappear, Maggie. People just quit listening. There's a difference. And the difference is everything. She didn't cry. She just reached over in the dark and put her hand flat on top of mine where it sat on the arm of the chair. And she left it there a good while, longer than a thank you. Long enough that I felt how warm her hand was and how steady. And then she patted it once, like she was the one comforting me, and took it back and said the porch was getting cold. And I drove home that night and sat in my own driveway a while before I went in. Because I'd just understood a thing I'd been careful not to look at. That I'd started living for Sundays. That I'd started thinking 11 minutes was close and Kansas City was far. That the chair Ray had set first for me had become something I couldn't tell apart anymore from the woman setting it. I didn't call it anything. I didn't do anything about it. A man like me, who learned young that wanting things out loud is how you find out you don't get them, does not go reaching for the one good table he's got left. I just went in the house and lay there and listened to my own quiet and let the thing stay where it was. It came out in November, and it came out the way the worst things do, by accident, in front of everybody, with no time to get your face ready. Danny was home for the weekend with Becca and the kids. First time in months. And it was a good Sunday. The table full again, loud, the granddaughters under everybody's feet. Maggie lit up in a way I hadn't seen her lit in 3 years, moving around that kitchen like the old days. We were all of us in there after dinner. And Maggie's phone rang on the counter, and she had flour on her hands from the pie, so Danny grabbed it for her to see who it was. And he went still. The phone had lit up. And the picture on it, the lock screen, the wallpaper, whatever you call it, was a photo of me. A candid one from some Sunday, me at the grill out back squinting and laughing at something, taken when I wasn't looking. My best friend's mother had a picture of me on her telephone where most people keep their grandkids. Danny stood there holding it, and the kitchen got quiet the way a kitchen does. And he turned it around so the screen faced the room, faced me, and he said, in a voice I'd never heard him use, "Mom, why is Marcus your phone? I have been shot at. I have carried men. I have never in my life wanted to be somewhere else, as bad as I wanted to be anywhere but that kitchen. And I did the thing I always do, the thing that is the worst of me, the thing that is my whole life in one move." I put my hands up a little, and I started backing toward the door. "Danny, hey, it's not, I don't know why I should head out. I've got an early," backing away from it, apologizing for taking up space, getting small and getting gone, the way I learned to before I learned to talk, because in my experience, the safest thing a man with no claim on anything can do is leave the room before anybody makes him. And Maggie wiped the flour off her hands on her apron, slow, and she looked at her son, and she did not get small at all. "Because I love him," she said, plain as setting down a plate. The whole kitchen stopped breathing. "I've loved him a while now, Daniel, and I'm not going to stand in my own kitchen and act ashamed of it for your comfort." Danny started to say something about Dad, about 3 years, about Marcus being his best friend, his voice climbing, and she let him get it out. And then she said the thing. She looked right at me, backing toward the door like a coward, and she said it to me and to her son and to God and everybody at the same time. "That's the man I'm going to marry. I just haven't told him yet, because he's the kind of man who'd rather leave a room than be wanted in it. Look at him, he's doing it right now." And I did it. God help me, I did exactly what she said. I said something about not wanting to come between her and Danny, and I got in my truck, and I drove the 11 minutes home, and I did not come back the next Sunday, or the one after that, or the one after that. I told myself it was the decent thing. Danny was my best friend, and that was his mother and his dad, 3 years in the ground, and the whole town would talk. And a man with no family and no money and nothing to offer had no business reaching for the one warm table he'd ever been allowed to sit at. I told myself all of that, and it all sounded like character, and it was all just the old thing wearing a clean shirt, the old thing that says you don't get to want, so don't. And then you can't be told no. I let the Sundays go cold. I pictured her setting one plate at that table built for 8, and I made myself not drive out, and I called that respect. The month I stayed away was the loudest my house has ever been. That's the thing nobody warns you about quiet. It gets louder the more you've got to not think about. I'd come home from the shop and stand in my own kitchen with a gas station sandwich, and the only sound would be the refrigerator running. And I'd find myself 11 minutes up the road in my head, picturing her at that table built for 8, setting one plate the way I'd watched her almost set 4 out of 30 years of habit and catch herself. Except now there was nobody even to catch herself in front of. I'd done that. I'd taken the one chair back out of that kitchen and called it a kindness. She texted me twice. The first one said only, "You don't have to be scared of me, Marcus." I read it about 40 times and didn't answer it, because the only honest answer was that I wasn't scared of her. I was scared of how bad I wanted what she was offering. And that's a thing a man can't make himself type out. The second one came 2 weeks later, and it just said, "The Chevelle misses you," which was Maggie's way of saying she did. And I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand for a long time and still didn't drive out. Because the old thing in me had a grip it had spent 32 years getting good at. I told myself she'd be better off, I told myself a younger man, or a richer one, or no man at all and her dignity intact, was better than the broke mechanic who'd backed out of her kitchen. I was very generous with her future, the way a coward is always generous with a thing he's too afraid to reach for. Earl set me straight, because Earl's known me 10 years and doesn't have the patience for a man feeling sorry for himself. I'd been a black cloud around the shop for a month, and he finally put down his wrench and looked at me across the bay and said, "You want to tell me what you let walk off? Or you want to keep slamming my good tools around like a teenager?" I told him the shape of it. Best friend's mother. Too old, too soon. Too much town talk, nothing to offer her. Earl listened to the whole sorry list, and then he wiped his hands on a rag and said, "I have watched you keep half this county rolling for 10 years for $19 when it costs you 40. I have watched you fix things for people who never once thanked you and give the chair you're sitting on to whoever walked in cold. You have spent your entire life so scared of wanting something for yourself that you decided being useful was the same as being loved." He threw the rag down. "It ain't, son. And a woman who'll say in front of her own boy that she's going to marry you, that's not something a smart man respects to death from 11 miles off. That's something a man drives toward." Then he picked his wrench back up. "Wanting it ain't stealing. Nobody's daddy taught you that, so I'm telling you now." I went out the next Sunday. I didn't have a plan. I had my truck and Earl's voice in my head and a thing in my chest that had been getting louder for a month. The sound an engine makes right before you finally have to listen. She was on the back porch when I pulled up, in the cardigan, with a tissue in the sleeve. And the look on her face when she saw my truck was something I'm going to carry the rest of my life. The way she made it go careful, made it go still, braced it. Because she'd said the truest thing she had in front of her own son, and the man she said it to had backed out the door and stayed gone a month. And she wasn't going to let her face hope twice. I came up the steps, and I made myself do the hardest thing I know how to do, which is to want something out loud, and I started where I always have to start, which is with what's wrong with me. I've never once in my life said out loud that I wanted something. I told her. Not once. Because my mother was sick and my father was gone, and I learned before I was 10 that if you want a thing out loud, somebody'll take it just to watch your face. So I made myself small, and I made myself useful, and I told myself that being the man who fixes everybody's car was the same as being somebody people keep. It's not. Earl had to tell me that. I had to be 32 years old and have a man twice my age tell me that wanting something isn't stealing it. My throat had shut down to about nothing. "You said in that kitchen I'd rather leave a room than be wanted in it." You were right. You're always right. It's infuriating. But I'm not leaving this porch. I drove toward it. I love you, Maggie. I have for about a year, somewhere between the spark plugs and the shoebox. And I've been too much of a coward to say it, because I didn't think a man like me got to want a thing this good. I'm saying it now. I want it. I want the table and the Sundays and the books and you. I want all of it out loud. She was crying now, but it was the other kind, and she was almost laughing through it, shaking her head. "You're a slow study," she said, "for a man who can hear a bad bearing from clear across the lot." "I know it," I said. "A whole month, Marcus." She stood up out of the chair. "I said I was going to marry you with flour on my hands in front of my own son, and you got in your truck." But she was coming across the porch as she said it. I knew what I was. I knew what people would say. I'm 53, and I buried a good man, and I decided I was done apologizing for still being alive. The only one who needed convincing was you. She put her hand flat against my chest, warm and steady, right over the thing that had been making all that noise. You don't have to be useful here. You hear me? Ray set your place first, so you'd quit thinking you were a guest. I'm telling you the same thing he was. Sit down. Stay. You're not borrowing the chair. You never were. I kissed her on that back porch with the cold coming up off the fields. And it wasn't anything like a man backing out a door. Her hand stayed flat on my chest the whole time. And I could feel my own heart going under it, loud and stupid and alive. And for once in my life, I didn't try to make it quieter. Danny took longer. That part I won't pretty up. He didn't speak to either of us for the better part of 2 months. And it was bad. And there were phone calls Maggie took in the other room that she came back from with her eyes red. But here's the thing about Danny. And it's why he was worth being my best friend in the first place. When he finally drove down and sat across from us at that kitchen table, what came out wasn't really about Ray, and it wasn't really about me. He sat there a long time, and then he said low, "I just need her to still be my mom. I moved away and I made my own family, and I told myself she'd just be there in this house, the same, whenever I got around to coming back. And I know that's not fair. I know I want her frozen, so I don't have to feel bad about leaving." And Maggie reached across and took her son's hand and said, "Baby, I'm always your mom. But I'm allowed to be more than the thing you left behind." And Danny put his head down, and after a while he reached over and shook my hand, hard, and said, "If you ever, and didn't finish it, and didn't have to, then that was the end of it. A little over a year later, the table on County Road E is full every Sunday, and the chair at the head of it is mine. We married in the backyard that next June. Small Earl in a tie he complained about all afternoon. Danny standing up beside me because there wasn't another man on earth I'd have asked. The granddaughters dropping the flowers and then eating some. Maggie wears her hair however she pleases now, and there's color back in it some weeks and not others, and I have learned to keep my opinion to myself. I moved my shoebox of receipts into her kitchen for good, and I still charge Bill Hennessy $19, and she still tells me it's the most stubborn kind of generous there is. And she's still not entirely sure it's a compliment. Danny brings the family down once a month now, more than he ever did before, because, and he admitted this to me over a beer in the garage, the house feels like a place again instead of a thing he's bracing himself to visit. There's a thing I see now that I never had. And it's so small, I can't quite explain why it puts a hand on my chest. On the chalkboard on the refrigerator, the one where Maggie's kept the grocery list for 30 years in her own handwriting. There's my name now, partway down, in her writing. Marcus. Shop pickup 2s, folded right in among the milk and the eggs and the things this house needs. Like I'm one of them, like I'm a thing this house needs. I stood in front of that refrigerator the first time I noticed it, and I about couldn't move. I spent my whole life being grateful for a borrowed chair at other people's tables and calling that enough. Because wanting one of my own seemed like a thing a man like me didn't get to do out loud. Maggie said the want out loud for both of us, with flour on her hands, in front of her own son, before I ever found the nerve. And then she stood on a cold porch and waited a whole month for me to catch up to a thing she'd known all along. I had it backwards, the way I've had most things backwards. I thought the most a man like me could do for somebody was keep their car running and dry their dishes and never ask for anything back. But it turns out the bravest thing I ever did wasn't fixing anything. It was finally standing on that porch and saying the word out loud, want, the word I'd been too scared to say my whole life. The table's full again every Sunday. My name's on the refrigerator in her handwriting, and the chair at the head of it is mine, and I have finally, at 33 years old. Stopped apologizing for sitting down in it.